Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Adult Sunday School lesson for October 31st, 2021. The lesson this week is also from the Old Testament, the book of Ruth, chapter 1. It deals with a dialogue between Naomi, a mother-in-law, and Ruth, a daughter-in-law. Our unit for the next 4 Sundays is entitled Dialogues. That word dialogue means to talk with or discuss. You share words back and forth. It's what the word dialogue means. And today's lesson introduces us to Naomi and Ruth. Next week we will have a further dialogue between Ruth and Boaz. After that, we're going to move to another dialogue between Hannah and Eli, who was a priest of Shiloh. This is outside the book of Ruth. And then we're going to move to the New Testament book of John for a dialogue between Pilate and Jesus. Dialogues in Scripture help us better understand characters and themes, helps us flesh out content. We can get to the bottom of what other people are thinking or feeling when we dialogue with them. So dialogues are good. In our conversations back and forth, it's a genuine sharing of heartfelt interests, one with another. The key themes that we're going to see during this 4 weeks of dialogues deal with love and loyalty, God's mysterious workings in the midst of tragedies or where we might think there is no God present, and the fourth dialogue between Jesus and Pilate centers on what is truth. These are wonderful passages of Scripture that will be very helpful to us. The key message or messages in the book of Ruth are shown on this slide, and they include the idea that God can work through anyone's life. It's not a matter of whether we're highborn or lowborn. God works through all of us. We're going to find in the book of Ruth that a Moabite Arab is the mother of Israel's kings. This is Ruth. She is not of the tribe of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She is not a law-bound Jew, but rather she is a Moabite Arab. Yet she is in the genealogy or lineage of Jesus and David. And so we learn from the book of Ruth that sovereignty and grace of God are universal. They don't reside in any one country or any one ethnic group. It's good for us to remember that. So here's some background information about the book of Ruth. A couple sought to escape drought in Bethlehem, a husband and wife, and they take their 2 sons east to a whole other country, to Moab, which is now modern-day Jordan, which is on east of the Jerusalem environs and on east of the Dead Sea. The sons marry Moabite women, but within 10 years, all 3 men, the 2 sons and the husband, are dead, leaving 3 widows destitute. The elderly mother in this situation is named Naomi, and she decides she's going to walk back to Bethlehem, which is quite a trek. She advises her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, to go home to their mothers, to remarry, to get on with their lives and try to better themselves, because Naomi herself has nothing to provide to these daughters-in-law now that the sons are deceased and out of the picture. Orpah reluctantly agrees, but Ruth walks to Bethlehem with Naomi. So in Bethlehem, the 2 women catch a husband. They find what's called a family redeemer, a man named Boaz. Ancient Jewish custom for the closest relative of a deceased man to marry the widow to make sure she's cared for. It's known as levirate marriage. It's an ancient form of Social Security. It's a way to deal with women who could not inherit property, but it's to make sure they're provided for. I'll say more about this next week when we look at Ruth and Boaz. But Ruth and Boaz have a son named Obed, who becomes the grandfather of Israel's greatest king, David. So that's the surface narrative of the book of Ruth. However, Clyde Francisco, who was an Old Testament professor at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary for many years, and whose book, Introducing the Old Testament, I have in my library and frequently refer to, says that the book of Ruth may have been written to meet a current post-exile problem. In other words, the narrative in the book of Ruth takes place during the reign of the judges, which is before the kings. However, after Saul, David, and Solomon, the kingdom split, and the kingdoms had other kings that were really taken over and deported. The Babylonians took the Jewish exiles prisoner in Babylon, and for a period of time they remained there, but afterwards they were allowed to go home. So this is the post-exile problem that we're dealing with, is how to deal with foreign wives. Naomi is the returning exile. Ruth represents the foreigners who came along at the same time. And Boaz represents people of the land who were left behind when others were taken into captivity. So just as the three people, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz, produced a notable son or lineage, beginning with Obed, David, and the other kings, so these three groups in post-exile Judaism, that is, the people returning, those who remain there, and the foreigners, merged a great kingdom post-exile. So the real dynamics of the post-exile situation that the children of Israel faced are depicted in small measure in the events that are referenced by Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Have you ever heard of Oprah Winfrey? You know, she's a well-known television personality, but yes, that's right. Her real name is Orpah, not Oprah. She was born in rural Mississippi in 1954. She was named after Orpah in the book of Ruth, but back there, they evidently didn't consult a Bible, or they were unsure how to spell or pronounce it, so they started calling her Oprah instead. So it's now Oprah, but her intended name was Orpah, after Orpah in the book of Ruth. It's a marvelous love story on the surface. It's sheer literary excellence. It's unsurpassed in terms of telling a dramatic story. It depicts extreme privations and sorrows overruled by the mercies of God. It was written during a late period of time. In other words, it's after the law, it's after the prophets. Its inclusion in the Hebrew Scriptures is not a part of the Torah or the prophets, but it's included in the writings that were the last part of their canon to go into their sacred writings. Post-exile, it's after the return of the exiles from Babylonian captivity. They're trying to pick up the pieces and reinstitute their following of Yahweh in their homeland. But it's also a subtle polemic against Ezra. You can read in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah the events associated with the return from the exile, who tried to purge foreign marriages from the Jewish community. So we've got a critical problem when the exiles returned to their homeland. They didn't have the land anymore. Somebody else was in possession of it. How do you get the land? And then what do you do with it once you have it back? These are complex issues that had one solution prescribed by Ezra, but the book of Ruth, I think, is a counter to that, or as a subtle tract against these measures instituted by Ezra. It teaches us really that the sovereignty and grace of God are universal. They are not the providence of any one religion, any one race or ethnic group. So there are 6 scenes set in the days of the judges. There's in the country of Moab. There's back in the village of Bethlehem. There's in the harvest field of Boaz. There's at the threshing floor where they're taking care of the grain, harvesting the grain. There's at the court of the village gate where there's a marriage ceremony, or the renunciation of levirate marriage takes place, and then a new home. These are vivid scenes, tells a complete story. There's an absence of details, yet all the essential facts are present. You can really get grounded in this. There's quite a lot there. There's been movies made of this. I can remember seeing years ago a cinematic depiction of it that has stayed with me. But reading it, it's quite dramatic. So here are some of the mixed marriage reforms that Ezra prescribed when the people returned from their Babylonian exile. The Jews returning from the exile found the land owned by foreigners. Others had taken possession of the land while they were in Babylonian captivity for, I think, 60 years, or certainly it wasn't a short amount of time. So how do you get the land back? The easiest way to get possession of some of the land was to divorce Jewish wives and marry the daughters of these wealthy aliens who were in possession of the land. So maybe some of the Jewish men, in addition to their Jewish wives, just accepted other wives from these non-Jewish aliens, Gentile aliens. But in Ezra chapters 9 and 10, you can see that now, as they married these owners of the land, they took possession of the land. But now here comes Ezra saying, oh, wait a minute, Jewish men, you've got to divorce these foreign wives because they're an abomination to Yahweh. So it was kind of like a 2-step dance. Step 1, marry the foreign wives so we can get the land, and then divorce the foreign wives while we can keep the land and get rid of them. That is a surface reading, and not a stretch from the surface reading in Ezra 9 and 10. So the Broadman commentator on these measures says, in utter disregard for human feeling and human rights, they broke the home asunder, sent away the innocent wives, and disowned the helpless children. The commentator goes on to say, such brutality is not necessary to preserve the faith. Yet that was one of the keystones of Ezra's measure when the children went back to possess the land. Well, Jesus taught that the Sabbath was made for people. You don't put the Sabbath teaching or teaching the law above the needs of humans. The people weren't made to serve the Sabbath. So Christian teaching would go against these drastic and unprecedented measures of Ezra. So the book of Ruth may be seen as a protest and reply to this controversy. And it doesn't feel right to me, does it? That you marry a foreign woman to get her property, and then here comes the head priest saying, now you got to get rid of these foreign wives because they're an abomination to Yahweh. That doesn't feel right to me. There's more to the story than what I've presented, in that the returning exile people could have said, well, this land was originally ours. It was ours to begin with, so we're just getting back what was ours. And what led to the exile in the first place may have been foreign wives and worshiping idols associated with foreign wives. So maybe there was some need to purge idolatry. So it's always a complex issue, but it's like saying, yeah, I'm not at fault. I got the land back. I stole it back fair and square. But it doesn't seem right to me. So let's read our scripture today. Ruth 1 through 6 says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephraimites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moab wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food." In other words, the famine was over back in Jerusalem. Wow, what a lot of narrative to place in just a few verses. In these first 2 verses, we can see a couple start off in Bethlehem, and Elimelech and his wife Naomi. They had 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these names correctly, but that's Kentucky English. It's the base Hebrew may be much different, but you get the idea. They traveled to the country of Moab to escape a famine. Moab is modern-day Jordan, which is an Arab country. In verses 3 through 5, we see the sons took Moabite wives, Orpah and Ruth. But after 10 years, all 3 men died. So the widows started to return to Jerusalem. That's the framing of the pilgrimage home. So here I've shown Jerusalem there on the left with the left red dot. The red dot on the right would be Jordan or Moab, where they had journeyed to avoid the Jerusalem famine. And now they decided to walk back. They didn't go over the mountains or by boat over the Dead Sea, but they walked around. It would be a long road, a long distance. The distance between Moab and Jerusalem is about 40 to 70 miles, depending on the route. And it's a rugged trip, steep, difficult to go over. Estimated the trip would have taken 7 to 10 days to walk this distance. So it wasn't a pleasure trip they were on. Here's an example of what life might have been like. There was rocky desert conditions. You sit down and have a meager meal. Would not have been an easy trek at all. So let's read about their return to Bethlehem. These are in verses Ruth 1:11 to 18. But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they are grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters. It has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. These are the most poetic, heartfelt words that are sung at weddings. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. Oh, heart-rending scene. Naomi advises her daughters-in-law to seek new husbands in Moab. Orpah says, okay. She reluctantly agrees, and so she departs. But Ruth declares her loyalty to Naomi with such loving words that have been immortalized in songs that are frequently sung at weddings. Naomi reluctantly agrees that Ruth can accompany her back to Bethlehem, says no more to dissuade her. Well, this may have been a scene something like we've experienced. There's Orpah walking back to Moab, staying there, trying to find a husband there. But the older woman, Naomi, and daughter-in-law, Ruth, are clinging to one another, going back to Jerusalem. On their way, they might have tried to find food to eat by, this slide depicts the way that the harvest went. The harvesters were instructed not to take all the grain, but to leave the corners and stubble so that widows, orphans, aliens might go back and glean where the harvesters had been and get enough to sustain their daily needs. May have been something like this. But this shows them going back to Jerusalem and being met by the congregation of the local ladies. And they can hardly believe their eyes when they see Naomi that has returned. They said, is this Naomi? She must have really changed in the 10 years she's gone. She left full and returned empty. She left to try to escape a famine with some wealth, a husband. She returns empty-handed, poor and destitute. So let's read the concluding verses, 19 to 21. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? She said to them, call me no more Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So evidently the base words of Naomi and Mara mean full and empty, or some word similar to that. Their own return causes a stir among the whole town. Naomi says that God, or Yahweh, has dealt bitterly with her. And she's taken a new name, Mara. Naomi says she went away full, but Yahweh has brought her back empty. Wow, what a story. So, we look at this and we see people in need. We might think, what ministries do our church support in order to help those who do not get enough to eat? You know, we have our blessings box and our coffee offering and other mission activities that go to help those who don't get enough to eat. I saw recently I was looking online that in France they've enacted legislation that grocery stores are not permitted to throw away food. Any food that they get rid of, they must give to charitable institutions or to the homeless. I think that'd be a good law for us to think about doing. But these would be questions that would be interesting to talk about in your classes, and it might pique your interest in knowing what you can do to help those that don't have enough to eat. Like Naomi, have you ever faced life-threatening changes in life? You know, life is full of changes, and it's natural to feel abandoned and hurt and powerless and afraid. All of these emotions may have been going through Naomi. And she gives vent to that when she talks about how she feels God has been dealing harshly with her. So have you ever felt like Naomi that God has dealt bitterly with you? But the magic of the divine touch is that no matter what situation we're in, God finds a way to obtain long-term blessings from short-term bitterness. So Naomi has gone through some bitter trials in life, but she's going to see how God has a way of fashioning success and blessings from these short-term problems. So I wanted to mention a couple of books from my library that would be useful if you're interested in these situations in Ruth and Ezra. One is this Introducing the Old Testament book by Clyde Francisco that I refer to frequently. And another one is A Light to the Nations by Norman Gottwald. He was a professor of Old Testament at a theological school, which is more general in nature than a theological seminary. So this book, A Light to the Nations, gives more of a historical perspective, not just a religious perspective. And it's excellent source information about levirate marriage and how Ezra felt that he was justified in sending away the foreign wives for the preservation of the purity of their religion. So there's always a tension in religion, isn't there, to remain pure so that we don't inflict damage upon ourselves, upon God, and on the one hand, and on the other, reaching out and bringing everybody into the tent. So as you can tell, I have rather a liberal bias in that regard, that I believe God's tent is big enough to accommodate any seeker. So to me, it's not a good thing to send away the foreign wives, even though there may have been some religious reason why some would think it necessary. Well, thank you for joining me today. Remember not to take me too seriously. My views are not endorsed by any group, school, church. They're just my own well-intentioned analysis of what I read in the Scripture and my sources. Remember our prayer concerns, not only for those that are having trouble getting by physically, but those that are grieving, those that are confused, those who are depressed. We lift up one another in our Sunday school classes. Next week we'll continue the story and talk more about Ruth and Boaz. Again, shout out to Daryl. Thanks for all his hard work in putting these sessions together. Check our various sources and enjoy your Sunday school lesson. See you next week.